general. Also kind of look into nonverbal aspects of communication. And that's chapter 7. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is on power and politics. Remember what we did? So the huge emphasis will be on understanding the main basis of power and how they play out in the organization, and power tactics that are used. So remember, we were talking about coercive power, reward power. Those two were most commonly used, yet least effective. And we also talked about reverent power and knowledge or expert power, which should be used much more, but they're not because they're costlier and more time-consuming to implement. So pretty much chapter 8 will evolve around, we have 6 bases of power, we said that, and then look at the empowerment in terms of politics and power. So that will be your chapter 8. Chapter 9 talks about conflict and negotiation. We talked a lot about dysfunctional and functional conflict, therefore you should really understand the difference, why we should use functional and how is it beneficial to the organization. We also talked about affective or emotional conflict and cognitive or task-oriented conflict. I don't think I've ever seen you being so quiet.
Yeah, what was that one thing? It's like
emotional or affective, and cognitive or task-oriented. So kind of understand under what condition it may be beneficial to group, what type of conflict would that be? You know, what determines that one can say this is a functional conflict? How can you observe a conflict and say, yeah, this is quite functional conflict, and this one is really not functional, it's very dysfunctional. So know what's the, and then look at the 5 conflict management strategies, basically yielding, compromising, problem solving, forcing, and avoiding. So that's your chapter 9. Chapter 10 talks about culture or organizational culture in general. We should be familiar with what's the purpose of organizational culture, how you can read organizational culture, meaning, you know, what you see, read, how you read. You know, that's relating to artifacts, stories, rituals, and so on. Language that is used. How can we create organizational culture if we have a new company? How is that done? And then, of course, how we do sustain once we have created a culture. How we sustain and maintain it. Can and in what circumstances organizational culture can have perhaps downsides? What would those be, like negatives organizational culture? Usually a challenge is when we have mergers. And then if we do have challenges with mergers, what are those and how you overcome them, how you change organizational culture? And then lastly on chapter 10, strategies or stages, I should say, of socialization process. What stage are you right now in this moment taking this course? It's called pre-arrival. And then when you have interview, you go to organization, you have encounter. And then you have metamorphosis and so on. So be familiar with those stages of socialization. That's all in chapter 10. Chapter 11 is on leadership. Look at the theories. We've talked in length about behavioral theories, trait theories, and situational or cognitive theories. I strongly encourage you to take a deeper look at goal and path theory. Goal and path theory. Goal. Yes, and path theory. Remember that contingency theories are also called what? Situational theories, yes. That will be for, and of course, transformational, transactional leadership. Be familiar with that. We talked about charismatic leaders. Can charisma be something negative, and if so, in what circumstances? And do women and men lead differently? So, moving fast to chapter 13, which is organizational structure. So, make sure you're familiar with the difference between organic and mechanistic model. Organic and mechanistic model. Remember the PowerPoint presentation where I emphasized 6 questions that you should consider? Be familiar with matrix organization, and remember the one that outsources? Modular. Exactly, modular. What are different parts of departmentalization and why it's done that certain way? And where is the trend today in terms of how organizations are structured? Remember, we determined that we're moving towards flatter organization, and we are breaking down barriers. One barrier that is commonly broken right now, it's teamwork. That's internal breaking. External is once you involve suppliers and so on, and you have teams that cooperate outside. So, what about chapter 14, organizational change? I gave you a handout, and this is your focus. So be familiar with Kotter, 8 steps, Lewin's 3 steps, action research, and appreciative inquiry. That's pretty much chapter 14. The cases you have done already. You have done them in class, so you should be familiar with it. There will be slight twists to them, but nothing surprising. Nothing we haven't discussed or anything that would surprise you. The questions, the 7 questions that I am putting there in the short answer questions are all coming from this review that we have. So pretty much, my advice to you is that you read the chapters and then you go over the PowerPoint slides and note if you have made them. Because certain things that are not in textbooks or in chapter or on slides, I emphasized in class. Not many times, but there were 3 or 4 occasions where I said, this is not in textbook, take some notes. So that's, any questions? I've handed out my last request, which is how can I make this class better? Or what